Hey there, welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Underscore's You. It's been a while since I've done a formal album review in this space. I made the executive decision this year that I prefer ensuring if I'm going to take the time for the longer review, I'd want it to be worth my while in terms of quality or lack thereof, or where I was simply overwhelmed and had way too much to say. And thus, it might be a bit surprising that I'm taking this route for the Underscores album. For those of you who don't know, and that number is going to be shrinking every week in 2026, Underscores' You is now one of the most critically acclaimed pop albums of this year, well, really across any genre, and initially it didn't surprise me. After all, I got on board with Underscores in 2023 with her tremendous concept album Wall Socket, easily one of the most ambitious and challenging albums of that year, but also one that felt like it was set up to win over a certain set of fans and critics who might still hold out against poptimism on principle, not because of the dislike for the genre, but a reticence to thinking that they can make fully composed, larger album statements instead of just collections of killer singles. Now, hyperpop fans, if you think that's unfair, or you're wondering if that's a bias that I might hold, well, you're both right, and I think there's a seed of something and a note of pushback from certain genre fans that poptimism can get, even if there's a whole lot of album genre artists who aren't entirely honest about the unassailability of their preferred genres or the albums they're in. Now, those fans are reachable with pop music, and more often than not, they'll be won over by that ambitious concept album. But if the artist then goes to make a more straightforward project of bangers, they could be gone just as quickly. And I bring all this up because yeah, I felt a bit of that reticence preparing to get into You. I loved Wall Socket because of its genre-blurring storytelling and challenging ideas, a little less won over by the pure hyperpop sound. I've been hit and miss on that music for a decade plus now. See my long video essay on hyperpop earlier this year as the rationale as to why. It's complicated. But one of the reasons Wall Socket could pull me into its wilder sonic spaces more effectively, it was that concept. If I had the feeling that it was adding up to a greater narrative purpose, there's a certain benefit of the doubt built in. Whereas, well, look, I'm a pop fan as well, but it becomes a different, more atomized tightrope. So while I was prepared to enjoy this, I was also expecting a bit of a step back. Even in a tighter, streamlined package, I don't love all the lyrical themes or sounds that hyperpop usually explores. Even if I knew Underscores would likely have an interesting spin on them, caught up in the blinding fluorescence of big malls flexing and melodrama, not always my thing. Or to put it another way, there was a sentiment that I observed on social media describing that You was for the girls, Wall Socket was for the boys, and Fishmonger was 5 years ago when we're all just that much older now. So maybe if I was cooler on You, so be it. But is that what happened? Well, quite frankly, no. I actually wound up enjoying You way more than I initially thought that I would. Yeah, my expectations got subverted, and while it took me a little to fully grasp what this album was doing at its core, and I'm not sure it reaches the insane individual heights of Wall Socket, in a way, it's more consistent and tightly composed as a hyperpop album that also has a lot more layers than it's gotten credit. Well, I'll argue that it's less excusable those layers have not been fully explored. I mean, think about it. You is just over a half hour long, considerably shorter and seemingly less dense than Wall Socket. Given that there are additional layers and subtext to this album that would only seem to enhance the depth and critical appeal, why have we not seen more of that appraisal? Is it just because it's music for the girls that seems like the majority of reviews focus way more on the pure sonic experience or the tableau of visuals it could evoke rather than lyrical themes? Or when the lyrics are considered, they're then cast aside, peripheral to the whole girly pop experience that's built more for the Instagram or TikTok montage, a high-intensity soundtrack to just living your best life? Because, you know, on a base level, You is remarkably effective in working in that lane. I'll give her credit, albeit running into some of my usual frustrations within some hyperpop production. Admittedly, with Underscores behind the board, she manages to dodge some of the blown out PC music mastering that was really endemic to hyperpop in the 2010s. and chunks of the 2020s, but right from the up-tempo grainy pulse of Tell Me You Want It, or the house patter of Hollywood Forever, or the minimalist Britney-esque electro-pop swagger of Innuendo, I Get You, where Underscore's vocals slide across the layers of autotune, where the drops almost feel more driven off of rubbery bass textures than tuneful, there was still this usual issue I have with some hyperpop, where the creaking metallic stutters weren't carrying as much melody as the hazy vocal overdubs or the grinding EDM synth drop, or if they were in a cut like music, they were pressed through these hyper-caffeinated bro-step quakes, where any organic instrumentation feels brittle or ephemeral. And if you feel that softening some of hyperpop's edges in favor of a sound cribbing notes from Carolyn Polachek or Charlie XCX, especially with some of the touches of guitars calling back to the brittle electroacoustics of the 2000s. I mean, Do It sounds like something Madonna would have cut around Music in 2000, and ironically, it's probably my least favorite song on the album. Well, okay, the influence is not there, but by the time we get the husky overdubs that lead into the choppy, auto-tuned a cappella of The Piece, or the watery minimalism of Lovefield, or the wiry, cracking blocks through the length of Bodyfeeling that build some terrific grooves, I recognized exactly why this was working so strongly for me. Mid-2000s Imogen Heap. It's kind of odd that a surprising number of critics viewed this influence as a revelation beyond just pointing to the hide-and-seek memes, when pop stars as popular as Taylor Swift have been open and highlighting Speak For Yourself as a 2000s pop masterpiece, for at least as long as I have, and by that I mean the early to mid-2010s, that a whole lot of rappers also started sampling Imogen Heap en masse. So I don't know. If Carolyn Polachek cribbed the fantastically ethereal swell that soars up to the heavens, Underscores is leaning into the razor-tight, melodically uncanny grooves that are no less earnest, even if some of the guitar-driven fuzz on a cut like Bodyfeeling. It's why I was shocked to hear some call this as reinventing pop or hyperpop. I mean, not to be a hipster who has heard all this before, but this is in direct continuity with literal decades of forward-thinking electro-pop, with the dense compositional chops to match. It is awesome that folks are finally giving it the credit that it really deserves, and not just as an odd sample or a meme to be taken ironically, but some of us were already there. Might as well come out and say it. But what is Underscores actually doing with it? Well, if you only want to take the album as describing a lovelorn, ultimately failing relationship that fades in record time as she grapples with fame, I mean, I guess you could. It's familiar, it fits the genre for the girls, and at first listen, it feels like a shrinking of scope, especially in comparison with the high concept of Wall Socket. But right from the first track, I recognized there was more going on here. In an excellent interview with NME, link in the description, she talked about not just her constant work to rebuild her relationship with making music as a producer and writer, but also with being a pop star, examining how one would be perceived as a celebrity when she inevitably made it. She's canny enough to not glamorize it, but also actually recognize the seductive appeal, possibly the dire consequences, and how much of that comes through the active give and take conversation through art with the audience. She is going to commit, and she's gonna go too hard, but you have to tell her you want it, which makes the audience openly culpable in the metatext. It's why the first third of the album is openly riding that high between the romance and creation. Nina Geraci did this a lot as well last year, but Underscores is more interested in some of that plastic glamour, the celebrity, playing for higher stakes with a wider, knowing lens, where she's not going to shy away from the melodrama of just enjoying all of it. There are roots of this on Wall Socket, and they crop up here in Hollywood Forever in the moral ambiguity, in the lines of, is it bad that I kind of love being a bitch? I started telling myself that I deserve it. And that's playing tricky territory and playing the little games of popularity, as she's aware just how quickly she could be turned upon or commodified. She knows the game of resentment in that she is playing, and she just hopes by the end she's not a casualty of it. She doesn't want to be buried in Hollywood forever. So let's take that self-awareness and project it across the arc of the album, where the relationship ultimately doesn't work, and she's left lonely, and that despite trying to wish the other person well, there's real heartbreak and the hope that they aren't quite over it. Extend that to the arc of a pop star who knows that their 15 minutes might be running up, and it's genuinely heartbreaking, where you don't want the numbness of it all so much as just feeling the gravity of that loss as a passionate artist. I would also be remiss to not speak on the trans subtext of this album, of which I'm kind of baffled on a project that she's described as her most personal to date has not seen as much examination. Like with Wall Socket, it is treated matter-of-factly, a continuous normalization and humanization that I really appreciate, especially in 2026. But by Innuendo, I Get You, and lines like, I'm not really your type of girl, it's a layer of the unsaid that factors into Lovelorn and how neglected she feels, especially across the back half of the album. It's not the only point of emotional motivation on the project. This is not an album solely focused on the trans experience, but you can hear how it interweaves with her struggle in being perceived as a public figure, or as an artist in her music, or just as a person, where you have to have some level of deflective glamour in place to survive, one that she's willing to bend around in order to be herself but also appreciated or loved, and just how often she has felt unrequited by partners who view her as the second option, or when it might be easier to slip into pure disaffected business girl boss on Do It, showing that blurry metatextual line. This is a place where she could well dissociate, just stare into her own mirror of deflective irony, especially online, but she chooses not to, instead experiencing that heartbreak, that feeling of being cast aside or feeling disposable, both personally or as an artist, where she wants to feel all of it along the way, especially with the knowledge that it's all so impermanent. The power of You as an album is that mirror and how deeply you want to stare into it. She's willing to give it all, make the sacrifice when most of her peers might not be, which is an artistic experience that might be uniquely shaped for women, specifically trans women, but it's got a certain universality in the drive, the anxious yearning as a creator. Are you willing to match her in that intensity? Or is it just going to be thrown aside as music for the girls? In fact, here's a tangent. This is going to go long. I apologize in advance, but I need to get this off my chest. For a long time now, I've genuinely hated the whole music for the girlies or for the boys. That framing is why certain genders don't get the emotional experience of certain art. Not to tread into Tara Mukni or Khadijah and Bo's territory, they've made a lot of thought-provoking material in this work, especially observing how social media shapes this discourse orthogonal to more academic observations. This is in that territory, and truthfully, it's just been frustrating me for years. We're gonna focus on the music. Now, on the surface, running on the broadest and most shallow stereotypes, which unfortunately is the way a lot of people, if not the majority, engage with art. I don't like it. It sucks, but we gotta live with it. I get why the framing holds sway, most often as a deflection. It's not for you. You just won't get it. There's something ineffable to a specific gendered experience that the other side just will not get emotionally. And as someone who believes that we engage fundamentally with art first on an emotional level, yeah, I mostly agree with this. Especially if I'm being honest to meet art where it is and where it will not align to my own experiences, and sometimes you gotta accept that. I'm not gonna say I don't intellectually get it, I often do, so much as it's just not for me. And that's just fine. Being able to acknowledge that difference is one of the big reasons I got rid of scores for albums. Because how do you honestly represent not for me in numbers beyond just opting out and not scoring the project? If my score represented a subjective emotional response where analysis is then layered on top, which to me is fundamentally the most honest, rather than pretend there is some consistent objective standard, there is a real tension between honestly recognizing the more intellectualized quality or resonance of a work and one's emotional response that could be kind of more muted to it. Critics deal with this all the time, especially when talking about projects that are more collectively acclaimed, but they just might not like in the same way, or it doesn't click for them. It happens to all of us. If you're going to be giving out a rating or recommendation for at least some of those where it's not clicking but it's got all the critical acclaim, you either lie and express your awe and reverence towards something that you're not feeling because it's not for you, but those you claim to respect love it, so might as well co-sign, or you shrug, you give it a 6 out of 10 because that's the true representation of your lackluster emotional response. You might even be able to justify it, and you know the pitchforks and torches are being delivered on schedule. Are you prepared to sign for them? Now look, none of this is new. It's not surprising. I reckon that any white guy who seriously engages with being a hip-hop critic or a black musical art as a whole, you gotta have some level of this difficult conversation where you get seriously introspective, not just about your appreciation of said art, or lack thereof, but why you like or dislike what you do. Not just the emotional resonance, but the intellectual framework you're putting up around it. Are you looking to emulate or lionize a specific archetype and live through the art? Or are you trying to identify deeper themes or struggles? Or is all that just an increasingly flimsy excuse to intellectualize something to look more sophisticated in order to cover your more base emotional response? Or who the hell even cares if you're engaging sincerely with the art and trying to meet the artist where they are? Or does it even matter if you're being sincere there if you're a part of a majority group driving your purchasing power and taste into art made by minorities and how the industry will inevitably commodify and co-opt that interest? If you just felt the throbbing pressure in your temples with me describing all that discourse, congratulations, I got it too. But the point I'm trying to make is that if you write or talking about rap music, you've had to engage on some level with this no-win migraine situation. And I wonder how much poptimism has attempted to open some similar cans of worms. To broadly simplify, a lot of pop music has been coded as feminine, mostly because of the total collapse of the male pop star archetype in the past 15 or so years, if not a cool or aspirational figure for a lot of guys, then because of the predominant listening audience. So when I say music for the girls, there is a well-popularized stereotype of what that sound is, what the aesthetic is, only further propagated through social media. Not for nothing, if we're talking about dance pop, we should also mention the music for the gays, something on a similar demarcation, this time with more queerness. You can probably then make a subcategory of music for the dolls, specifically to talk about the trans women or just trans experience, where there tends to be some social overlap with music for the girls, but not consistently, and both underscore, pardon the pun, a lot of poptimism, where a lot of this music has received more critical acclaim in recent years, because why should they be systemically excluded by the old guard who would not represent them or look down on them? And it's not a bad thing that they've got a seat at the table, if only because it's allowed a lot of genres in, who would get marginalized less because of their content and more because of who their audience is. As someone who's tried to hear a lot of both, there is a real problem when certain genres get excluded on the pretense of shallowness when A, it wasn't remotely consistent inside the genre, every raucous critic makes their only exception, B, it was not even a standard that the favored genres experience. I've listened to a whole lot of rock and metal and hip-hop that can be just as shallow or indulgent or hedonistic or just outright stupid as they might claim pop is. And C, felt more like an excuse to keep those pop acts' fan bases out of the room. Presumably letting pop with more legitimacy in should allow critics to experience more voices and perspectives, maybe even broaden their taste, inspire the fan bases to do the same. But truthfully, I don't think that really happened. In comparison with how the hip-hop discourse demanded some of that introspection from white critics who were trying to engage in good faith, I don't think a lot of men as critics who have been expected to treat pop music as for the girls or for the dolls with the same level of intense consideration or introspection, beyond just passing lip service to legitimacy. Oh, the larger aggregate publications have taken advantage of this to pull in the broader audience, often to then let their often newly hired or freelance pop critics face the slings and arrows of outrageous stan backlash. And of course, there are a lot of exceptions to all this, often on YouTube, targeting a younger audience. I'm looking at broader trends, because if you read the bylines, you notice certain patterns, where the old guard critics can share space for the new guard poptimist, but how often do they sincerely engage with that music, meet it where it is, or are just tasked with the regular genre staples and they don't have to try? The whole hyperpop piece I released 6 or so weeks ago, it was built off of some of that conflict. And while you could call this the unofficial sequel, in truth, I think the problems run deeper. How often do you see the token pop music album make a lot of those critics' year-end list and it feels like a backhanded compliment? Or where there's still a consistent exasperation that they have to give this the time of day or take it seriously? And I don't think that it's been precisely better for some of the poptimist critics, where it often feels like they're starting their writing from a defensive posture that really, if the genre was legitimate, they shouldn't have to take. But because of existing dismissive attitudes, they haven't gone away, so they still have to take that posture. How often do you see their own demarcations that balkanize pop music between what's critically respected across some of the demographics versus the stuff they don't respect, even if the overall content and quality is not that far removed? Might be just based off of aesthetic, the sort of exclusionary attitude that they themselves once faced, but are now framed as punching uphill. I mean, I understand the defensiveness. Pop has long been characterized as shallow or melodramatic, which is often absolutely gendered in how art is judged across all the media, especially made by women for women, to say nothing of teenage girls, and that's not even touching on the broader, malicious systemic exclusions that threaten the ability for trans folks to just live their lives. But in trying to make the walled garden against this hostile patriarchal frame, both culturally and institutionally, it's still kind of being defined by that frame, often at the expense of extolling its own unique strengths. Broe Deschanel did an excellent video on this recently. Even if I don't fully agree with all of her takes, I highly recommend it. Links over there. Because, alright, you know what, let's go all the way there. There is something very gender essentialist about how music for the girls is being framed. Honestly, music for the boys gets framed with that too, but I'm focusing on underscores here, especially the shallower dance stuff, or just the definition of what they consider the girls to even be, mostly because of a specific outward performativity that often seems at odds with itself, where really I could just import that speech from Barbie and I wouldn't be saying anything new. It's empowerment unless you don't want it to be. Then it's framed as empowering because you made the choice for it to be that. Lana Del Rey has now entered the chat. It's shallow until it's not, and there's greater layers to that, but also what's wrong with being shallow? Addison Rae has now answered the chat. It's frivolous and frothy and fun, and that should be enough on its own, but also, look, you get the point. Now, I do not have to say it's the full experience of all women so much as a performance that women and girls know well in the patriarchal structure, facing a different sort of performative amplification if you're then trans and trying to fall in that space too. And that while it can be bullshit if forced, some will embrace it unironically or even praise it. But at some point, the conversation shifted away from some of the complicated and kind of cringy self-conscious engagement to, look, it's for the girls or it's for the dolls. We didn't need to explain anything more. Fuck off, go away, we'll deal with it. A pure statement of defiant, euphoric power because the guys or the TERFs that would protest against it, they're not worth considering anyway. They operate on bad faith online. I can't even really disagree with their position either. Who wants that debate? But delve a little deeper, you start seeing something closer to a self-organizing high control group, coaxed through multiple layers of internet poisoned irony, where it's hard to even ask the follow-up question or acknowledge problems because you have no idea how sincere any of it really is. The stan fan bases where dissent or even good faith analysis is aggressively targeted, where even internally blind positivity and comeback narratives are propagated irrespective of whether or not they make any sense with the artist's era, and rarely consistently amidst infighting from those who are just outside of that shrinking group, even if they might share common cause in the long term. BTS fans have now entered the chat. Then there's the creeping conservatism that comes when it's all boiled down to blunt power relationships. So why not play the chart games? Why not work off of what's perceived as the winning side, which can wind up patriarchal, cis-normative, driven off of capitalism, where the industry gleefully reaps the rewards thanks to all that conspicuous consumption, all washed in pink. And then circling back to underscores, it leads to an artist who is making legit great pop music, who's working on a lot of deeper layers, and there's this weird refusal to engage with them because it's framed as for the girls or for the dolls, and apparently that means more challenging lyrical or thematic analysis is no longer asked for? That's not even an appropriate stereotype around for the girls. I can certainly rattle off a lot more popular and lyrical acts, and not just women who have bigger feminine fan bases than masculine. I've seen Hosier live, but it seems like at some point with specific genres or specific acts for the girls, if you're not among a specific rarefied exception to be considered as the songwriter, and that qualification changes album by album, Taylor Swift's now entered the chat, you don't get that attention. And it's made all the weirder because Underscores' wall socket got so much of that attention 3 years ago. Is it just song structure or the perception of lacking depth that convinced a bunch of critics or listeners that they don't have to try so hard? Or changing societal norms that don't think they should bother to go deeper, when none of that's been reflected in what Underscores has said off record? How condescending is that toward the artist or audience? The former for just assuming Underscores is playing the tropes on what she herself has described as her most personal work to date. How does that make sense? Or the latter just a reinforcement of, you don't have to think that hard about this. That's okay. Enjoy turning your brain off. Of course, it's all that you want to do anyway. And look, I'll be the first to admit this piece got wildly out of hand in terms of my writing. I apologize to you, Underscores. Your album's legit great, probably among the best of 2026. I feel so bad dragging you into all of this, especially when the 4-word response that some will use to shut all this down is, it's not that deep. But I don't know. Just because you're not thinking about it doesn't mean none of us are, even if we're in the out group. What bothers me the most about the it's not for you, or it's not that deep, or it's for the girls or for the boys is less an acknowledgement of that being true and defining a market or aesthetic, so much as shutting down the conversation. And what's truly frustrating is that I can't even argue with some of the reasons why they would shut it down. I lived through so many eras of bad online music discourse where there are a lot of dudes who look like me and who weren't willing to be introspective with their own taste, yet always willing to argue at length to own the conversation. They suck. Full stop. I'll even concede at a few points that I might have been that person in the past. It's not like my audience is overflowing with women, especially if I left a bad first impression and being so argumentative over the past 13 years. I may have been doing this too long. But is the better alternative that when you read discourse about albums and feel like there's just layers missing because they might be perceived disingenuously? That some critics stop trying to meet art where it's at because being the stenographer, either in group or outside of it, drives more traffic? That only the extremes are prioritized through weaponized misunderstandings that get clicks seemingly every time? That instead of trying to interrogate our feelings as to why art might not work for us, meet it where it actually is, we just shrug? We walk away, willing to hide behind an in-group rather than having a conversation where we probably have way more in common than we think, or even if we don't, it might be profoundly revealing of a new frame or deeper truth in which to experience art? And you can say that the internet and social media incentivizes the extreme, the attention-gathering takes. But what we don't like to acknowledge is that the algorithm is built off of what drives engagement and activity. That's a human condition. That comes from us. Ears in the air waiting for the conspiracy. And I think what makes Underscore stand out so powerfully to me is not just acknowledging how much it sucks to be perceived poorly, but then just putting it all out there anyway. Because the passionate rush of any experience trying to have the conversation makes it all worth it. So I guess I got a challenge. If you like something, ask yourself why. If it's for the girls and you're among the group, is it just solidarity or is there something more? If it's for the girls and you're among the girls and you hear a layer it's not getting discussed, be it in the sound or production or lyrics or themes, ponder as to why. Especially when the album's reception's been so positive, you've got the best possible environment to surface it. It's not like you're in the trenches fighting for a mediocre project. If you've been told it's for the girls and you're not among that group, yet you like the album anyway, maybe there's a resonance that can be untangled. Maybe there's something to be learned about the art or your own taste. And if you don't like it, be a part of the group or not, well, if you got this far in the video, you probably already asked yourself as to why and done some of the work. So the question I got for you is to go the next step. Really dig into that reason. What could be driving it? Especially if you might feel like defaulting to the easy excuse. Sure, it might all be art and entertainment. Most people will never go that deep, and it's easy to be among those people. And at the end of the day, you don't have to go there either, especially if you feel like some of the mystique of the art might be demystified by going there. But is that mystique only there to sell you more? Or is it hiding a deeper question? And you're scared of the answer. I mean, the power that Underscores has is that even if it doesn't seem to be that deep on first listen, she prompts you to look in the mirror with a very simple 6-word response. It's not that deep. To you. And even if you know that it all might just come and go, or you're wishing for more, or could mean the world and all that, seems like by the very end, I think that's up to you.